Okay, everybody, welcome to the second to last webinar for Technovation in the 2016 season. Hello, students, mentors, and coaches. I see that you're here from all over the place, from India, Canada, different places in the US, middle school students, high school students. It's really fun. So I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today with Nathan Gold, aka the Demo Coach. Our topic will be powerful presentations and mastering Q&A. So, in case you're wondering who I am Amy Gardner, the Technovation Director of Curriculum. And right now, we're about 2 weeks away from the submission deadline for the 2016 season, and we're really excited. You guys, I'm imagining, are putting the finishing touches on your apps, your business plans, and now you're going to be preparing for your pitches and communicating your ideas with people. So it's the perfect time to get together with me and Nathan. So we did have another pitching webinar recently, and I did mention there too that having the idea for your app to solve the problem and working out the technology to do that and the business plan is really important. You've come this far and we're excited, but remember, it's equally as important for you to communicate that idea and to practice and rehearse it so that people understand, become more interested, and also so you can be in a position to get funding. So during this webinar, we're going to go deeper into what a pitch is from the last webinar we did on this subject, and we're going to wrap up with questions we have for Nathan and your Technovation projects. So stay tuned all the way to the end. Before I introduce Nathan, I wanted to touch back on what our judges are going to be looking at in terms of your pitches and who these people are. So all teams will be submitting a 4-minute or less pitch video by the April 21st deadline, and some teams will be taking part in regional pitch events too. So while everyone is submitting this video, some of you will also be presenting your thing live in front of judges. So this is really important. You should definitely be able to answer questions because they're an extension of your pitch. If you haven't done it yet, your team should definitely be rehearsing and getting in front of people and different kinds of people so that you can receive feedback and use that feedback to make improvements before your submission. So the judges for Technovation are typically tech or business professionals who volunteer their time with us very generously. They're going to be providing feedback to your team based on an evaluation rubric that's used to assess your work. So what I did for you guys was I cut and pasted the relevant judging rubric kind of sections here. And I just wanted to go over those really quickly because this is really important. You can find this rubric on the Technovation website, and you can also find it in the materials section of this webinar. And for those of you who are joining later, this will be included in a link to the materials. So very basically at the top, we have the ideation category. And you'll see that you can get up to 10 points total for this whole category. And they're going to want to know, did you identify a problem that has social implications for your community? And you can see that the top score is yes. This is a wide-reaching problem, and this app is going to solve that. And does the app actually address the problem? So make sure that you're thinking about that and who the users are and why this app is going to be helping them. And then you can't see the whole rubric here, but I've cut and pasted the bottom part, which is the overall impression. And this is very subjective. The top part is objective. So they're asking, did you identify the problem? Did you solve it? But the pitch is where you really bring in your own personal flavor and you're trying to persuade people that your idea is valuable and worth kind of promoting for other people to use. You can think of it as kind of an argument, and not in the sense of arguing, if something's wrong or right, but an argument in terms of, is this persuasive? Is it compelling? Is someone really are you generating interest in your idea so that people will take that idea and want to do it? So Nathan is going to really talk a lot about this because the art of persuasion is probably a big part of the art of pitching. And I just also wanted to mention that you can add any questions in the chat feature. And when I see one that's appropriate for Nathan to possibly answer while he's talking, I'll inject it at a certain point. or I might hold on to that question for the end because I think it's a more general thing. So, anyways, um, Nathan Gold is the demo coach, as I mentioned, and he comes to us from the San Francisco Bay Area, where he spends his day coaching people from around the world on how to prepare for really high stakes presentations. He does this through workshops, keynotes, one on one sessions in person and online, and we're so lucky to have him today. He's delivered over 15,000 presentations, people, and 12,000 hours of professional coaching and training, and he's also a published author. He's also worked with small and large companies, including Glue Networks, Education.com, Innovation Norway, Kaiser Permanente, and IBM on designing, scripting, and delivering more compelling and memorable presentations, really in situations where you can't afford to miss. So, Nathan, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what your path was to becoming the demo coach?
Of course. Thank you very much for inviting me in today, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with your students. And for those people who are not on the line but will be listening to the recording later on, I hope you enjoy the session. So for me, it really began when I was literally 15 years old, and I was in a computer class in my high school on Long Island, and we had an adult education class set up for the evening, and the teacher didn't show up for the class. So the principal, and this was before cell phones, so we had no way of knowing really what the problem was. So the principal came in and said, Nathan, you have to teach the adults the class. And all I did was help the teacher put the class together and the materials, and I was there to support her and help her when the students had questions. And these were adults, and I'm 15 years old, so what do? I walk up to the chalkboard, and I grabbed the chalk, and I said, hi, my name is Nathan. And I turned around and I looked at everybody with a big smile on my face, and I said, I'm your teacher for tonight. And I got the bug today. And so fast forward, got a degree in computer science, worked in hardware and software companies my whole career, and all of my jobs were customer facing, either in customer support, tech support, sales support. I never had a sales job because I really didn't like asking for the order, but I did love selling, and I loved persuading people to use the product or the service I was representing. And so my whole career pretty much was just presentations, and more presentations. And then 9 years ago, when I got laid off for the third time in my career, not my fault, of course, but just how things go in high tech, I decided that it was time to do something for me. And I really looked in the mirror and said, what do I really excel at? What am I really good at? What have I developed a skill for? And it was presentations. So I literally hung my sign out one day saying I was a presentation coach. And then I met an entrepreneur a few months later and helped them raise some money, and that led to where I am today here 9 years later.
Whoa, that is such a cool story. I like that you were just kind of thrown into the fire and you really took the bull by the horns when you were a student.
I mean, I didn't really even know what an entrepreneur was 9 years ago, and that's a good message to everybody on the line, is that today there are so many thousands of entrepreneurs out there that if you don't get your message really clear and make it memorable and really bring it across to your audience, you're just getting lost in the noise.
Can you explain to us, before I hand the reins over, what is your definition of an entrepreneur?
An entrepreneur is anyone who's willing to risk it all to change the world.
All right.
And that doesn't mean you're the CEO. It could mean that you're one of the co-founders. It could be that you're the chief marketing officer, or you're just the admin or the support person. You can still be entrepreneurial minded and consider yourself an entrepreneur, but not necessarily start your own business. That make sense?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to give you presentation capabilities, and that might take a second.
Okay, let's see if I can give you the right screen. We'll go with this one. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, it just came up.
Okay.
Perfect.
There. So you see everything that I see right now, right?
Yeah, I see a big triangle with cool paint on it.
Okay, so let me bring that over to the other screen so that I can look at the webcam when I'm talking to you. There we go. Okay, so once again, folks, I will give you a link to this presentation. It's going to go very, very fast, but it's not hard. The information I want to share with you right now comes from two workshops that I do that normally take about 6 hours to get through, 3 and 3. But I thought what I would do here is just really quickly take the best of my powerful presentation workshops and the best of my mastering Q&A workshops, put it together in a real quick, here it is, and then you can use these tools in your preparation for the presentation that you have coming up. And by the way, 10 of your 55 points are on your presentation, and I'd say that's a pretty significant part of it. So before we begin, though, I want to ask all of you if you'd be willing to take a little quiz or a little quick test, because what I find is that with such sessions like this, I need to get your brain sort of warmed up. And to do that, I'm going to just put a sentence up here on the screen, and then in the chat window on your GoToTraining, I'd like you to write, well, in a second, I'll tell you what to put in there, but I'm just going to put a sentence up here on the screen. I would like you to just read it once to yourself. Okay, now I'm going to put that sentence back up on the screen, and this time what I want you to do is read it to yourself and count how many of these F's do you see. Now, adults and people like to make up rules, so here's a couple of rules you do not have to make up. One is that there are no F's inside the E's because all the letters are in uppercase. And I did that on purpose because I just want you to count the number of uppercase F's. The F can be, I'll put the sentence back up in just a moment. The F can be anywhere in the sentence, okay? And the answer is not infinite, okay? There's no black text on the black background, and there's no white text on a white background, okay? I'm going to put it up now. When you have the number of F's that you see, please enter the number in the chat window. Ready? Go.
I'm not seeing anything.
You're not seeing anything? There.
No, I'm seeing a blue screen.
How about now?
There you go. So we're supposed to count the number of F's. Okay.
Count the number of F's, and then write the number in the chat window. Come on, somebody should be putting the numbers in by now. 4, 3, 5, okay, 7. That's interesting. Okay, I'm going to take it off the screen for a second. Keep putting the numbers in. 4, okay. Because we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to get straight to the point. No one got the right answer. And we're all looking at the same thing, aren't we? I mean, we were all looking at this same sentence. Now look at it again. And I think what you'll find is that there are 6. You can see them, right, Amy?
I still see the same number.
You still see 3. Well, I could leave this up all day and you probably would still only see 3 unless I pointed out the other 3. But the point is there are 3 two-letter words staring you in the face.
Yep, I see it now.
There are 6. There are 6, right. There are almost 6. The point I just wanted to make with this is that some of the things I'm going to tell you right now are like these F's. They're staring you right in the face, but you're not seeing them. And I want to help you see some more F's as it relates to your ability to communicate more effectively with the people that you're faced with when you're telling them about what you do, why you do it, and why anybody should care. Speaking of the anybody, your audience is the key. You have to know about your audience. The less you know about your audience, the harder it is for you to present. So There are plenty of ways for you to find out about your audience today, but I do want to point out one technique that I've been using that many people haven't heard about yet. So on Sunday nights, I used to open up my calendar, go through the calendar for that week, and research all of the people I would be seeing brand new. And I would, look at their LinkedIn and things like that, and that would take time. Well, I don't have to do that anymore because there's an application that does it for me now. It's called Charlie App, www.charlieapp.com. And 1 hour before every one of my meetings on my calendar, it goes out and does what I used to do on Sunday nights, so now I don't have to do it anymore. And frankly, the most important thing that I care about when I want to see somebody or meet somebody in a cafe or in a lobby or in a building somewhere or in an airport, I need their picture, and I need to know what how they spell their names, because those are the two most important things to me. And Charlie App does that for me automatically for free. Gives me the picture, tells me how to spell their name, and gives me all kinds of other stuff that would give me related information to that person. I pass it on to you. It's at no charge, and it's free. I'm a company of one. I'm king of free. Anytime you want to know about something free, let me know. Now, when it comes to standing out in the crowd, you must work on figuring out ways that will let you stand out among the crowded world of entrepreneurs. Wherever you go these days, meetups, anywhere in the world, you need to work on standing out. Metaphorically, of course. You don't have to stand on your hands unless you're doing a yoga franchise. Now, one way to stand out is how you open your talks, how you open your pitches. And I want to just quickly, very quickly go through 12 different things that you can do in your opening, because I find that most people do either number 1 or 2, and they think that's the only way to engage an audience. So here are 12 quick ways. We're not going to dive into the depths of each one of these, because this is just kind of a flyover. Okay, the first way, the number 1 way that I see people try to engage an audience is with questions. And yeah, I get this works, but try not to ask obvious questions that don't really get me to think. Ask me a question that gets me to really think, not just one of those lazy questions that gets me to raise my hand. Okay? Number 2, the imagine route. Okay, I see people go up there all the time and they say, so ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you're sitting on Mars. And now I want you to imagine that you're looking back at Earth. And then imagine. Just be careful about how many imagines you put in there. It'd be better to make it more of a story and make us imagine one thing and then make it more of a story. 3, a good statistic could grab your audience before you say anything else. If you said that 97% of climate scientists agree with AGW, whatever that is, okay, you've got my attention. But don't state a number that everybody is stating. Okay, so if you're in the IoT world and the Gartner has just come out with a new report, everybody's quoting that same number. Don't quote that number. Try to extrapolate or abstract something out of that number so that people will get more curious or intrigued by what you're saying. Number 4 is a good quote. A good quote by somebody famous or not so famous, or even an anonymous quote, can be a great kickoff to any presentation where it kind of encapsulates the message that you're going to bring across to the audience. Number 5, a joke. Be very careful of using jokes to start a presentation. I'm not a big fan of telling jokes. Don't tell a joke just to tell a joke, just to get people to laugh. It should be relevant. It should have something to do with your presentation. Better yet, I'd prefer humor over a joke. Being a little humorous in the way you start, if you're good at it, could be a great way to engage an audience. But please, do not try to be humorous for your first time in front of your first audience. It usually will not work. If you're pretty good at entertaining an audience, or you can get people smiling or laughing at the dinner table, then you can use humor in your presentation. But be very careful of that. Number 6 is sometimes, as you look around on the internet, these TED Talks that are out there, some of them have such powerful words and phrases and minutes that sometimes you can grab a minute or 2 of a TED Talk and use that at the beginning of your presentation. It's an amazingly popular and powerful brand these days, and you can use it to your advantage. Sometimes I'll even send a link to a TED Talk to people I'm meeting with, in hopes that they'll watch it so that it sets the mood for the meeting. And about 90% of the time they watch it because people love TED Talks. So ask them to watch a TED Talk before you even show up, or use a piece of it during the presentation. Number 7 is a demo. If you're in gaming or people tell you this, I hear this a lot. You know, Nathan, once people see my product, they get it. And my response to you is then trash the PowerPoint slides, show the product to start with, and then get to the PowerPoint slide. So if people want to, if people get it when they see a product, show it up front. Have a self-running demo or recorded version of your product that you can show if you're lucky enough. If you're a hardware developer, you can show your product right in front, whether it's a 3D rendering or the actual product itself. If you're in gaming, it's really important that we see a little bit of your gameplay up front so that we know whether it's a kid game, an adult game, a shoot 'em up bang bang game, is it an educational game, what kind of a game is it, and what do the graphics look like. Number 8, when you start your presentation, you could have some music on in the background, and that music could set the mood. If you ever come to one of my workshops, there'll always be music playing when you walk in the room because I want you to be in a certain frame of mind when you sit down, and music has a way of doing that. So pick a favorite piece of music that you can use to start your presentation or play it in the background. Sometimes when you're doing these presentations, you get to choose what you want your introductory music to be. Pick a piece that you think would engage the audience. Number 9, this is not for everybody, and you have to be careful of how you use this. But if you stood up in front of an audience and said, "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I have a little confession to make." And then you give, everybody will look up, they'll stop what they're doing, and they'll want to know what the confession is. It's not a religious confession, but it's a way to captivate the audience with 3 words, and they'll listen to everything you say after that. Along those same lines, you could stand up in front of an audience and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, can you all keep a secret?" Or, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share a secret with you that I haven't shared with anyone up to this point. You're free to share it with people after this." When you share a secret with an audience, people love it. People love to know secrets. We love to know things that not everybody else knows. We love to know things that we can share with other people. But you have to be real and authentic about this. If you told the secret for a year, it's not a secret anymore. Number 11, your value proposition. Now, you've heard about that. You know what a value proposition is. Sometimes starting out with your value proposition is a great way to get people engaged. It's not always the case, but it could be the case. And then number 12 is my favorite number 1 all-time tool to get an audience engaged or to open a presentation, and that is with a story. All of the TED Talks just start telling you stories. This is the most effective way for you to engage an audience because the brain is wired for stories, so why not use them that way? I'm not a big fan of even numbers. I prefer odd numbers, so I'm going to give you a 13th as a bonus. And this is especially helpful for people that are engineers, scientists, and people who just don't like PowerPoints or linear click, click, clicks. Go up to the whiteboard or the flip chart or the easel and start drawing your presentation. You don't need a lot of information up there, and you want to make sure whatever you put up there is legible. But a whiteboard talk, it could be the thing that sets you apart from everybody else. I've actually seen people take a whiteboard up in front of a large audience of 400 to 500 people. It has to be a big one, but I've seen it done. And with iPads these days, with the pencils that you can draw on an iPad, you can have a whiteboard discussion on an iPad for 1,000 or 10,000 people to see because you just project it up on the wall. So there are 12 opening techniques, okay, for 13 I should say. There's probably 34 more that we could cover, but at least now you should be thinking about, okay, maybe I don't have to just ask a question to get my audience to raise their hand. There are other ways to do this. Okay, so now I'd like to take you through 2 different parts, covering some of the powerful presentation techniques that you can use, and then finishing up with some of the Q&A techniques. So back in 1963, President John F. Kennedy was touring NASA in Cape Canaveral. And he stopped the tour and he went over to the janitor and asked the janitor what he does here at NASA. And the man looked up at the president and he said, "Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." One sentence. Here's how most entrepreneurs would answer that question. They would say, oh, Mr. President, I'm the head janitor. I've been here for 18 years. Everybody reports to me. We have 37 cars in our fleet. 18 of them are EVs. The others are hybrids and blah, 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 blah. What I'm here to suggest to you folks is that you need to abstract out what you're doing higher and higher to the point where you can say, metaphorically, we are helping to put a man on the moon. Because all of you, every one of you on this conference call, are helping to put a man on the moon, metaphorically. Obviously, you're not doing that, but you are doing something probably greater than what you think. And we just need to get you there. One way to get you there is to work on your value proposition. Now, you've all heard of the value proposition, but I want to introduce you to a variation of the value proposition that comes from Steve Blank. Steve Blank is the grandfather of the lean startup movement or methodology that you've probably all heard of. And he just got so sick and tired of entrepreneurs going on and on and on that he designed this value proposition for people. And there are many formats, but he designed this. We help X do Y by doing Z. You fill in the X with who you help, you fill in the Y with what you do for them, and you fill in the Z with how you do it. And now you have one sentence that should encapsulate what you do and elevate the results to the point where people get curious. They lean in. They want to know more. Now, you don't have to fill in all parts of this. In fact, leave out the how so that people ask you how, and then you get into a dialogue. When people ask me what I do, I tell them I help people prepare for high-stakes presentations, and I usually stop right there. If I'm in a room with a bunch of people and I want to make a little bit more of an impact, I'll add this by rehearsing them as if they were performing in a Broadway show. And that simile of a Broadway show is what helps me stand out a little bit there. And I encourage all of you to find similes, analogies, and metaphors that help people remember you, that help you stand out. Here's a value proposition from a company called BidSketch. Create professional client proposals in minutes. Now, most of you come up with value propositions like, we help people create professional client proposals. Well, that's great. But if you want to really stand out and be different, you might want to add some very simple words like in minutes or something like that that elevate the impact of your value proposition and tells some of the impact itself. Now, here's something you've never heard of before as it relates to the value proposition, and that is you have so much value that some of you are providing that it's really hard to boil it all down to one sentence. So in that case, you might want to have more than one value proposition, but a way to keep track of all of your value proposition data is with a spreadsheet like this. I call it the value proposition matrix. You list who gets value from your product along the X. You list the values that you provide along the column label, like save time, save money, and other things. And then in the cell, you list how you provide that value. And if you provide it more than one way, 3 ways, 4 ways, you just list them all in this value proposition matrix. Cross out the cells where you don't provide the value. And now in one picture, you can show all the value that you provide in your product or your service. Not only is this a great way for you to see all the value that you provide, but I've seen people using this particular chart with investors and customers to show them how you provide value. Tool number 2 that I want to pass on to you is one you've all heard of. I've mentioned it here already, but many of you are just sick and tired of hearing of it. But I'm here to tell you that without you telling stories, you are sounding like everybody else. Leaders tell stories. Everybody else use bullets on their PowerPoints. The TED Talks are so powerful because that's what they do. They are all about stories. Excuse me. Why do stories work so well? Because people relate to your stories instantly. People remember your stories. And most importantly, people retell your stories. And when people retell your stories, boy, that is the best word of mouth you could ever ask for. Now, I just showed you a value proposition matrix. Here's another thing you've probably never heard of. I came up with the value proposition matrix on my own because of this tool. I read a book called What's Your Story many years ago, and in there the author talked about a way to keep track of all your stories so they're not stuck up in your head. And so he says you create a spreadsheet with 4 columns. Success stories, failure stories, fun stories, and legend stories. By the way, if I didn't tell you I was going to give you a link to this presentation at the end, I will, so you don't have to take copious notes. Should have told you that at the beginning, sorry. And then along the X row labels, you list the story types that you want to keep track of. Well, if you're an entrepreneur, here are 6 examples. You're going to have customer and investor and those other stories. And then when you get a story, like a good successful sales story, you just put a date and a time and a little note in the cell to remind you, so that in a month or a year or 2 years from now, when you bring up your story matrix, it'll just be chock full of reminders. So that way you'll have all the stories right at your fingertips. And if you have all of the people in your company, or at least all your managers, keep their own story matrix, you'll be amazed at the sheer volume of stories that you'll have someday if you need them. Now, when you have 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes to present, you have to know that there is an average number of words that people get out of their mouth. So when you design your presentation, you won't create this really long thing and then have to chop it back. So the average person speaks between 120 and 140 words per minute. So if you have 3 minutes, sit down with your computer, type in what you would say, and when you are typing, just keep looking at the word count. Keep that word count under about 400 words. If it's more than 400 words, you won't be able to get them out of your mouth because you have to speak too fast. Okay? It's much easier than creating something longer and chopping it back. When you chop things back, they normally sound like they've been chopped. So a couple of quick storytelling guidelines before we move on to Q&A. One is that be very careful that the first 10 seconds of your story have very powerful words or imagery or things that you do. Because the first 10 seconds is when people decide if they're going to listen to the rest of your story. So be careful of what you say and do in those first 10 seconds. If you haven't seen the TED Talk by Simon Sinek called How Great Leaders Inspire Action, that is your homework for tonight. Please go to the TED.com website, search on the name Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. You'll see a number of his presentations. How Great Leaders Inspire Action. Thank you, Amy, for putting it in the chat window. It's an 18-minute talk, and it will change how you talk about your businesses. Guaranteed. Not going to spend any time on that right now because you can go watch it later on. Finally, in terms of story guidelines, I just want to recommend to you that you take the analogy of a movie trailer. So why do the theaters or the movie houses create trailers of the movies? Is so that in 1 or 2 or 3 minutes you can decide if you want to go to the movie. Well, that's the analogy I want you to think about for your businesses. Think about boiling down or simplifying your message so that it's a movie trailer version of your business, not the movie. I want people to go to your movie, and if you try to shove too much information in their heads to start with, they won't want to go to the movie. When you get a link to this presentation and you jump to this section of the presentation, watch these 3 storytellers. They're some of the best on the planet, but you wouldn't think so looking at them. Now I'd like to shift over for just a couple of minutes into the other half of the presentation where many people take for granted, and that is the whole question and answer responses that you give to people. In fact, I find that most people spend a majority of their time in Q&A and not in the formal pitch. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the things to keep in mind. I have 3 sections: the basics, tough questions, and some advanced. So the first thing you have to remember is you need to maintain control. Just maintain control. Be your happy, confident self. People are seeing this for the first time. Don't let them razz you. Just maintain control. And if you're the one doing the presentation, you might want to let people know up front, when do you want to take questions? Do we want to take questions anytime? Or can you please hold your questions till the end, unless that's already defined by the event. Listening is probably one of the skills you need to work on more than anything when you're in a Q&A session. And the first thing is you need to listen. Too many people think they know what the question is people are asking, and in fact, you might not. And I see people answer the wrong question. So if you like to do word jumbles, what word is in the word listen? I'll save you some time. Silent, So when you're listening, you should be silent, be quiet, don't interrupt, let them ask you the question, even if it's the question you've heard 1,000 times before. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion, and you might find that you have more success in your business. When you're responding to questions, this is a perfect place for you to use your stories. You don't have to just say yes or no or I'm not sure. Use your stories. Not long ones, of course, because you're limited on your time. I generally recommend that you try to keep your answers to about 30 to 60 seconds at most. If it requires more than that, you probably should take the conversation offline. Very often, if you're not sure you've heard the question correctly, repeat that question back to the person who's asked so that you know you've heard the right question. More importantly, if you're in a room that you're not sure if everybody has heard the question, be professional. Repeat the question so everybody can hear it, and then answer the question. Be very, very careful about repeating the question and rephrasing it so that you answer the question you would prefer to answer. If you do this with an investor, they'll let you go on and they'll let you answer the question that you asked yourself. But then they'll say, well, that's not quite what I was asking you. What I really was asking you is this. And they'll make you answer the question that they really wanted you to answer. Now, when you've answered a question, if you get the slightest hint that you haven't answered the question, ask. Don't be one of those people that just assume. If you're not sure, just say, Amy, have I answered your question to your satisfaction? And they'll say yes or no. If they say no, then you say, well, I guess I'll have to take this offline with you because I'm not following. Or they say yes, and you just move on. Very professional. Never interrupt. Do I have to say never interrupt somebody asking a question, especially investors? Okay, I won't say it, but I said it. Because people do it. I'm amazed people do it. Also, don't get defensive. Yeah, they've only heard you for the first time. And it's possible that they timed out for a second when you said something. And now they say to you, so how much money are you raising? And you look at them and you say, what, are you an idiot? I said I was raising $500,000. Didn't you hear me? Of course they didn't hear you because they've got many other things in their mind. So just try not to get defensive, okay? They're not hearing every single thing you say. Maybe. Now, when you're getting into a discussion and a Q&A session with people, there's an instant way that you can create a battle with that person, or you can create a dance. And normally I would ask, which would you prefer to create with people? I think most of you would prefer to create a dance. But unfortunately, most of you create a battle because you choose one word in the way you respond to people that creates an adversarial relationship. It actually creates a battle with people. And that is, if somebody says something to you, and you agree by saying, yes, but, the but has just negated what they said. And you may say yes in agreement, but then you're saying but, and now you have just negated what they just said. I know it's a very small word, but it has a tremendous effect on the person that you're communicating with. And the way to fix this, to create a dance, and we're cat lovers here in our house. So I apologize to the dog lovers in the world, but equal time maybe in the future. The way to create a dance with your Q&A partner is to switch that word but to the word and. And I promise you, when you change that word but to an and, if you're agreeing or you're disagreeing with someone, you'll have so much fun. It'll actually become fun to disagree with people because you won't be fighting with them. You'll actually be dancing with them. And I can't stress enough how much this can change how you interact with people. Just try it with your friends and loved ones tonight or today. Don't wait for the next presentation. You got to practice this one because our first reaction is yes, but. But if you say yes and, you'll see a total difference in how people react to you. Finally, when you're limited to 4 or 5, 3 minutes to present, you can't cover everything, right? So if you have to leave something out, there's a chance during the Q&A session that you can build a segue over to the thing that you didn't say in the presentation. So let's say you have to leave something out. Leave it out. And then when you get over to the point where somebody asks you a question, they say, so they ask you a question, you answer the question, and then you segue over to the point that you wanted to make. So you answer the question, and then you say, and by the way, which is a perfect segue. By the way, that reminds me, or by the way, one of the things I also want to mention is, and then you say the next thing you want to say. I have just a couple more of information, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So let's talk just briefly about tough questions, because we all get tough questions, especially questions we've never heard before, or that we would prefer not to answer, or that our lawyers have said, you cannot answer these questions until the patent is filed. Okay, well, there are times when you're just not going to know the answer to a question, folks, and it's okay. I think you should accept right now that there's probably no time in your life that you're going to know all the answers to all the questions that anybody will ever ask you. So be willing to say, I don't know, but don't stop. I don't know. That makes you look dumb. In media training, they teach you to build a bridge to something you do know. So somebody asked me a question. I don't know. But what I can tell you is, and here are 8 examples of bridges that you can use to bridge over to something you do know that you can answer as part of the question, or a question that might satisfy the person asking, but it's not the exact answer because you don't know. Somebody says to you, what's your break-even point? At this moment, I don't know. My CFO is working on it right now. I can have an answer for you probably by tomorrow at noon. Would that work for you? Or I don't know. However, what I can tell you is we are blah, 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 and you give a good answer. Okay, so build a bridge to something you do know, and then you can say, I don't know, anytime you need to. One thing I find is sometimes people will respond to you, or they'll ask you a question that's just too general. They might say something like, well, I think your product's too expensive. Really? Too expensive? You're just going to take that as, oh, well, now you're going to start defending against how expensive it is? So be careful of how quickly you start answering some questions. Let the question come in your head and say, is this a general question or is it a specific question? Because if it's a general question like, I think your product's too expensive, or it's a general statement like, I think your product's too expensive, you might want to quickly respond to that person and say, I appreciate that it's too expensive, but what are you comparing it to? Or compared to what? And then you hear what they're comparing it to, and then you get a better sense for how much money is it compared to what they're comparing it to. So be careful of how general you let people get with you. Finishing up, just a couple of advanced Q&A. There are 3 main mistakes that I see people making in Q&A. Number 1, to the question as fast as you can with as many words as you can answer, and that is not the point. We're not here to try to answer the question with as many words as you can possibly get in that person's head. So slow down, take your time, take a breath. The second mistake that people make is they've heard all the questions before, and they stand up there in front of the people like this person is with 2 6-shooters on their side, and somebody asks a question, and they go, bam, answered, next question, bam, answered, next question. And then nobody asks you any more questions because you're too quick on the draw. So take it easy. People are only hearing and seeing you maybe for the first time, whereas you live and breathe and think this stuff all the time. So chill out, relax a little bit, put the guns away, make friends. And then thirdly, and this comes from media training. I learned this one back when I was 23 years old when I got my first media training. The biggest mistake that we all make when we answer questions is not only do we answer the question too fast and we run the answer by them as fast as we can, we don't show respect to the people asking the question. We don't give them the opportunity to show them that we're thinking about that answer. And so the key to making effective progress in answering questions is to make sure that you pause before you answer the question. Pause before you answer every question. The length of the pause that you put before you answer is dependent on the complexity of the question. If somebody asks me, how long have I been in business, I can't wait 5 seconds or 2 seconds to answer the question, but I can at least take a breath. And that's what I want all of you to think about. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, this is the one thing I want you to take away more than anything that will work for you, not in just your pitches, not in just with investors, but it works with your family, your friends, your peers, and everybody you talk with. When you put a short pause in before you answer a question, you're showing that person you respect them, you're thinking about the answer, and that you really are confident in that you can take a moment without having to jump on the answer so quickly. I can't stress enough how pause will change your life. And then finishing up real quick, when you're preparing for Q&A, you should prepare for your Q&A much the same way you prepare for a presentation. Make a list of all the questions that you think you're going to get. Put the video camera in front of you and answer the question, and then watch yourself answering that question. And then do you believe yourself? Are you confident? Are you smiling? Are you with the same level of enthusiasm that you were when you were doing the pitch? You won't see that unless you watch it on a video. And then collect all those questions that you get that you've never heard before, add them to the list, and then anybody that joins your company, you can just hand them that list and say, here are the 13 questions we get all the time, and then you don't have to spend any time with them on preparing them. They'll already be prepared. So real quick, this is it. I'm going to give you a link to and I think Amy will also put this in, this is a link to a page on my website that's 40 questions that are some of the toughest questions that investors ask entrepreneurs like you. And I would ask you to go to that page, look at some of those questions, pick the one or two that you are like, oh my God, if I ever got that question, I wouldn't know how to answer it, and figure out a way to answer it. Even if it's, well, I don't know. Somebody says to you, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a question I've heard investors ask you. Well, gee, I don't know. But in the next 1 to 2 years, what I can tell you is blah, 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 blah. I can't see what happens in 5 years from now. And in conclusion, here's a quote that comes from Ann Winblad from Hummer Winblad Venture Partners. She values communication so much that she actually decides whether or not she's going to do business with an entrepreneur, or a CEO, I should say, based on their communication skills. If you're not a good communicator as the CEO, as the founder, as the person raising money, you have a choice. Either give that role to someone else or get better at it. And there are ways to get better at it. Toastmasters, Dale Carnegie, and a whole bunch of others. Okay, I know I went on a little bit longer than I anticipated, Amy, and I apologize for that, but there is the link to this presentation for everyone on the call, and everybody in the future who watches the recording can see the presentation and all that I just showed them using that link. And there's all my contact information. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. Feel free to link in with me, and I'll be happy to help you in any way I can. Back to you, Amy.
Oh my gosh, I think you gave us all the secrets that our students need to know. That was so exciting. I did see a question.
Well, I could go on for hours.
We have a little time. I don't know how much time you have or students, but we might be able to go on a few minutes longer than anticipated. But we did.
Okay, we can go a little longer. If you want to have another session, I'm happy to set one up as quickly as you want.
Man, I was blown away because, and I'll just say this before turning it over to Q&A, a lot of these points are so important in life, not just for Technovation, not just for your pitches here, but in communicating with other humans. So these are so valuable, and you've got so much in there. That was so exciting. All right, I'm gonna type in this link in the screen so you guys can access it right now. But I did see a question coming in from DVVO team, and they ask, if you're pitching at something like, say, a science fair, and you only have a minute to get your point across and their attention, what part of the pitch would one want to stress?
When you only have a minute, there's probably 3 things to stress that I would emphasize. Number 1 is, what is the problem or the unmet need that you're solving? Because until people understand what the problem or the unmet need or the pain is that you're removing, everything else you say is out of context. Right now, 60 seconds is about 125 words. It's about 7-8 sentences. It's not much more than that. So number 1 is the pain, the problem, or the unmet need. Number two, you must say something about you, your credibility. You have to say a sentence about you and or your team. And it could be something as simple as you can combine these two things together. You can say, so 4 years ago, when I was completing my PhD at Columbia, we discovered that there was a major problem with the water supply. Blah, blah. Now you've covered both of those things literally in one sentence. So, number one, problem, pain, or unmet need. Two is the team. And three, go right to the solution. The brief description of the solution, and then, depending on where you are in your business, you want to go straight to traction. Who's using it? Is it being, is it valid? I mean, has it been validated by people? And then you probably have a few seconds to ask the audience for what they can do to help you. That's about all you have time for. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have a question. A lot of students come to me and they say, we're coming up with this idea. We have an app. We're developing it. It's a little bit similar to something out there, but, it's our own thing. What is your advice for teams that are working with solutions that may not be way too different from things that exist, but have, some certain trademarks of their team?
Yes, this is a very common thing. We see people, these Me Too's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So two things to keep in mind. One, you need to figure out a way to communicate what you're doing in a way that separates you from the other people that are doing something that sounds or smells or looks like what you're doing. The secret to that I didn't cover today, but I can give it to you right now since you gave me the opening. The way to get people to remember you over the other people out there is not to compare yourself to the others out there, but to say something. You can do it one of two ways. You can use a simile, an analogy, or a metaphor. And by using a simile, an analogy, or a metaphor, you instantly stand out different because your competitor or somebody creating something like you is not going to use the same simile, analogy, and metaphor. They wouldn't dare. No one's going to say that they prepare people as if they were rehearsing in a Broadway show. No other pitch coach is going to say that because they wouldn't want to sound like me. So using a good simile, analogy, or metaphor can, on the one hand, help you really stand out of the crowd. For example, I saw somebody jump up on the stage a few years ago, and they said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm thrilled to be here to share with you our machines that we build that turn water into money." They literally stood up there and said that. We build machines that turn water into money. Now, we build machines that turn water is literal, but the into money, of course, is the metaphor. And they actually make these canal turbines that when you drop in a rushing waterway, you tie it off to the side, you plug it in, and now you're generating free electricity. So does he make a machine that turns water into money? Well, no, but metaphorically, yes. And it could be the one thing that people remember about you over all the other companies making machines that turn water into money, but they don't say that. So on the one hand, you have to be very, very clear on how you are metaphorically or using a simile or an analogy different, or how you'll stand out. And then when you tell people what you do, you must, how do I say this? Don't be afraid of the elephant in the room. Okay? This is one of those cases where there's an elephant in the room. If you have a social networking platform, there's a big elephant in the room, right? It's called Facebook and everybody else that's doing social networking. So deal with the elephant in the room and say something like, well, unlike all the other social networking platforms out there, and tell us how you're different, unique, or special, or what's your secret sauce, how you're going to conquer the world. And that's okay, but you can't not deal with the elephant in the room, especially if we're all thinking, oh, this sounds like Facebook. Here's an example. And by the way, I don't want any of you to say, we are the Facebook and LinkedIn for golfers. That's just, don't use tech references like that. It's not right for you to do that. There's too many people running around saying, we're the Uber of, we're the Yelp of, We're the Airbnb of. And stop it. That's what everybody's doing. And frankly, a lot of people don't even know what those things are. If you want to have a tech reference or an analogy to a technical company, say it later. Unless, and there's a big exception here, someone in the media says something, you can quote them all day. I just told you there's a company in San Jose that has a Facebook and LinkedIn for golfers, and the Financial Times in London and I think the Wall Street Journal both had a title on their articles that said the meet the Facebook and LinkedIn for golfers worldwide. Now, if you say it, it's a little bit arrogant, but if somebody else says it, like a journalist or a paper, boy, quote it all day long. But be careful of those tech references. There's much, much, much better ways of doing it.
I agree.
Okay.
Any other questions from the audience? I'm wondering, until we get maybe another question, if any of you have considered changing your approach based on what Nathan has offered as suggestions, or, whether you're interested in testing out some of these ideas, because there's so many good ones.
Mm-hmm.
I
volunteered to listen any of those ideas. Either people can record their ideas and send me the audio, or we can get on a Skype call or a phone call for a few minutes and go over it. Happy to help. All pro bono.
I'm going to make myself the presenter so that I can, just so I can share a few final thoughts. Do you have any concluding thoughts, Nathan, before we wrap this up?
Sure. I'm always full of final thoughts. One of the number one questions I get from people is, how do I get over my nervousness? And let me finish by talking about that. Mm-hmm. First of all, if you want to not be nervous when you're presenting, you shouldn't present. You ought to go call the EMTs and have them bring those things over and put the paddles on you and hit the button. Because if you're not nervous when you're presenting in front of a group, then you probably shouldn't be presenting, because you don't have the fire, you don't have the energy, you don't have the internal, you don't care. So the difference between your nerves and someone like me, my nerves are all, my butterflies are flying in formation, whereas your butterflies are probably flying all over the place. So here are 3 things you can do to help you when you're nervous, and you will be. I guarantee it. I get nervous in front of every presentation, every time. I got nervous before this presentation, but I have a secret. I can deal with it, and I use those nerves, and I channel it into enthusiasm. So here are the 3 things you can do. Number 1, warm up. Warm up your voice before your presentation, before that important presentation, because if you don't, your voice is like any muscle in your body. If you just go out on the field and start playing, unless you're an expert, it's going to probably have some bad effect. So warm up your voice. Hum, sing, go take a walk. Hum, you don't have to, don't do your presentation, maybe the first line a couple of times, but warm up your voice. Number 2, your physiological reaction to nerves and anxiety can be to slow down your breathing. In fact, some people will stop breathing if they get really nervous. If you're really nervous, like your next up is like, oh, I guess I better go. I gotta go. So if you have that reaction, the number 1 thing I need to remind you about is to remind yourself to breathe. Literally, you have to remind yourself to breathe. And if you have stage fright, or you want to know a technique for how to get a hold of those emotions and all that adrenaline that's flying through your body that you have no control over, Google combat breathing or tactical breathing. And it's a very simple little technique that you can use while you're sitting in your chair, or while you're walking up to the center of the stage to the point where you're going to start talking. You can do this tactical breathing on the way up there, and it can really help gain composure over those nerves that you're feeling. Number 3, and this is my favorite, and I learned many years ago, this is called a mood inducer in psychology. They actually called it something. It's called a mood inducer. I never knew what it was called, but I just did it all the time. And so what I suggest you do is find a piece of music that as soon as you hear the music, A few 5, 4, 3, 2 seconds of that music, all of a sudden it just transforms you into the person you want to be. And usually it's a piece of music from a movie or something like jumping out of an airplane. There was music playing in the background, and that's the music you feel. So as soon as you hear it, you just jump alive. For me, the music I play in my head before I go up in front of every audience is the theme song from the first Rocky film. The Gonna Fly Now. That is my secret. I use that music in my head because I watched that film so many times back in 1978 when it first came out, or 79, whatever no, 77 I think it was, that music to me gets me instantly into the exact state of mind I want to be in, and my physiology reacts too. So when I get up in front of an audience, I don't need those 20 seconds like most people say. Just I need 10, 20 seconds and I'll be fine. That's an excuse. If you want to start with after those 20 seconds, find that piece of music, play it in your head, and then when you stand up in front of a crowd, you'll be like I am. When I'm in front of a crowd, I'm already at the top of the stairs with my arms in the air, ready to deliver my first punch, metaphorically. I'm not at the bottom of the stairs having to run up to get warmed up so I can give you my first punch. So warm up, breathe, and find some music that as soon as you hear it, boom, you've changed. And then you don't have to see your audience naked, like that book says, see your audience naked. Dumb idea. Really dumb idea.
I'm curious if anyone who's still listening has a song they're thinking of. I'm trying to think of what my song would be. I love that idea. And so many things I've heard you suggest are things I've seen theater groups doing when they're rehearsing or warming up. And I think it's really great to do exercises with your breath.
This is theater, Amy. This is, right? It is theater. It's just not formal theater.
Mm-hmm. That's what I love about it. All right. So I think we're running a little low on time, and a few people had to go already. So I'm going to say thank you so much. It would take me too long to summarize all of the great ideas Nathan had, but some things I really liked were the story matrix and the value proposition matrix. I think it really helps to visualize some of your ideas and organize your thoughts that way. And also the Steve Blank suggestion, we help X do Y by doing Z, and creating a simile, analogy, or metaphor to help people remember you by association in that way. These are all really great ideas, and I really recommend that you watch this again and kind of use it as a companion to help you when you're creating your pitches. If we're going by what Nathan said for a 4-minute pitch video, you would probably want to limit your initial script to about 560 words and then rehearse it and slow down a little if you're talking too fast because you want people to understand what you're saying. And it's really easy to, when you're nervous to speak very quickly. So just try and videotape that, video your rehearsal and see how slowly or quickly you're talking. So among all the other suggestions, I think these are really great ones, and you still have time. I know that you might be worried that the clock is ticking on you because of the April 21st deadline, but think of this as extra time. Use that time to talk to different audiences, write down their questions, anticipate their questions, because chances are you're going to get some questions. And you want to be prepared and you want to be able to answer those with confidence. And even if you can't answer them graciously and create that bridge Nathan talked about, how you can bounce back from that. So with that in mind, we still do have one more webinar with our App Inventor Fellows, Jackie and Pet. So if you're still working out your app and making some adjustments to that, I suggest you come because they have a really great way of explaining how to deal with some of those issues with App Inventor. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Nathan. People work with Nathan all the time, and he just offered all of this advice to us pro bono, and he did this with such a big heart. So I want to thank you, Nathan, and I want to thank everyone who came because your questions are always great, and it's always great to see where you're from and what you're working on and what you're thinking. So with that in mind, also, I just wanted to remind you, you can access the things we talked about in the materials panel, or afterwards, you can get the video recording and a link to all these materials through the Technovation curriculum website. So thank you so much, everybody, and I'll let Nathan say goodbye to you too.
Okay, thank you so much, and hope all of you do great out there, and don't hesitate to contact me.
Okay, thanks everyone. It was so nice being with
Bye.
you. Bye.